family members. We are excited about the second part of our series we've been having to focus on the impact of COVID. We were with Dr. Chantel Brown a couple of weeks ago, and today we're with two of our friends. One, our former children and youth minister, current pastor of the Mount Carmel Baptist Church, Reverend Marvin Gilliam, and our very own member, Dr. Jessica Brown. And they are going to have a discussion today, so I'm not going to jump into what they're going to talk about. But we're excited that you're joining us. And so as I normally do, I ask you to jump on and then let other folk know. So if you're watching by way of Facebook, why don't you start a watch party? If you're watching on Twitter, go to the church's Twitter page and just retweet it. Those of you who are listening by way of dial pad, thank you. And please reach out. Let somebody know that this conversation today should help you. We have committed to educating people. First of all, we think every person should get the shot. Every person should get the vaccine, first and second vaccinations, and the boosters. Everybody should get them. We've committed here at 6 Mount Zion Baptist Church to continue to inform people to do so. But we also know that this pandemic has, we've not seen anything like it since 1918. None of us were around during that time, so we're all wrestling with this for the first time. And so Pastor Gilliam and Dr. Brown are going to have a conversation today, not just about the physical impacts, but more so about the mental and emotional and spiritual impacts of what this pandemic has done for us. So we're excited, and we are thankful for them being with us, and we're going to jump right into the conversation.
Hey, Mount family, we are certainly glad to be sharing with you in this conversation about mental health and COVID-19, and certainly glad to be here sharing with Dr. Jessica Brown. Grateful for all that she does and for her work today, and that's all that she contributes in this regard. So, Dr. Brown, can you just give us, a lot of people watching may know you and may be familiar with some of the work that you do, but can you just give us a brief kind of bio and about your work as a psychologist?
Sure. So my name is Jessica Young Brown. I am a licensed clinical psychologist here in the state of Virginia. I like to tell people my clinical specialty is Black church folks. So anything at the intersection of faith and mental health is really where I like to live. I enjoy doing individual therapy. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy working with pastors and churches to really think about what it means to consider our mental and emotional wellness as a part of our spiritual flourishing. And for me, that really stems from being the daughter of a pastor, understanding that there were mental health issues in my own family that we didn't talk about because our faith didn't make space for that. And so my life and my work seeks to be a remedy to those places where we feel caught up and unsure about how our faith can allow us to give voice to the very real challenges we have in life. And I personally believe that the Bible is actually a roadmap for how God responds to people who are suffering. We don't always do a good job as the church of highlighting those stories. Sometimes we focus on spiritual messages over human messages, and I think there's space for both, and they can be intertwined.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the conversation around mental health was kind of growing and gaining some traction, particularly in the Black community before the pandemic. But certainly in the midst of, March 2020, everything goes kind of haywire in the world. And over the course of the last 18, 19, 20 months, the conversation has certainly been elevated. So what kind of impacts have you seen, or what kind of things have you seen being exposed more about mental health in the midst of the pandemic?
Sure. So I think one of the first things that came to light very early was the ways that our society really pushes us to go, and ignore ourselves as human beings, right? So when all of us were all of a sudden at home with our whole families, we realized how much work we were actually doing and how much running we were doing, right? And so I think we had to reckon with the fact that the way our society functions in some ways is unsustainable. It is not consistent with having a healthy mental and emotional existence. And so I think that was the first piece. The second piece was we had to reckon with how all of these systemic issues impact us at a personal level. So very quickly, we saw Black and brown communities being much more negatively impacted by the pandemic, and not just the health indicators, though that's a piece of it, but it was we're less likely to have jobs that we can work from home and actually be safe. We're less likely to have childcare. So we're balancing working and trying to take care of small children, right? And so I think, in the summer, after that March experience, we had this, people were calling it a racial reckoning, right? But we were really forced to sit down and look at ourselves because of this in a lot of different ways, as individuals and as a society. And for me, as a mental health professional, what I saw was that when we were forced to be in our homes, when we were forced to not engage in the hustle and bustle in the same way, we also were not able to ignore those parts of ourselves that were hurting. And we really had to attend to that, whether it was in our relationships, whether it was unhappiness with work. They're talking about this worker shortage. It's not really a shortage of workers. It's just that people are saying, I don't want to do this anymore, right? And so there's an opportunity that I think many of us have taken to re-envision our lives, but that's been hard fought, right? It's been a hard 18 months. And for many of us, we've been dealing with some growing pains in our places of privilege. And for folks who aren't privileged, we've been dealing with the ways our society doesn't show up for us. And so I think there's consequences to that. Emotionally, cognitively, we're experiencing stress on a different level. I mean, I know you had a kid you were virtually schooling last year, right? I mean, how have we been doing it? It's a lot. It's a lot. And so if there's a gift that I think has come out of all this struggle, it's that we now have to pay attention to ourselves in a different way. And many of us are deciding to shift our lives around so that we make space to manage our stress, to find the joy, to be with the people we really care about. And so my hope is that we come out of this really tumultuous time better than the way we entered it, right? For me, I don't want to go back to normal because normal was not working for a lot of people, right? But we have a chance to do something different and to take the struggle and turn it into something fruitful for all of us.
No, that's really good. I'm thinking a lot about how even in the context of church, how we talk about mental health and how we include rest in the busy schedules of like church life, right?
Yes.
And how that's important for each and every one of us. As you think about kind of the intersections of the various roles that you have, like what are some of I know you had some like big things happen. You had a baby girl born in the midst.
Did I have big things?
Born in the midst of the pandemic. So in terms of kind of like even in your own experience and kind of the intersections of your various responsibilities as a therapist, as a professor, as a parent, as a person, right? Like what are some of the lessons and the things that you've kind of gleaned to kind of help you along the journey?
Wow. So yes, I've had some really major transitions that, those transitions in a perfect world would have been a lot to manage, right? But managing those in addition to a global pandemic. So for me, the lessons are plentiful. I'll just name a few. The first one is that I really had to sit down and identify what was important to me. I have, as you said, a lot of different roles. Because of my profession, I'm often pulled in a lot of different places, and I get requests and opportunities to do really amazing things. And what I recognize about this pandemic, especially for me, but I think for many of us, is that my capacity was diminished, right? As someone who was trying to grow a baby and then had one and now trying to raise this baby in a pandemic, as someone who was mothering a small child, as someone who was managing a practice and working a job and all the things that I do, the stress of trying not to contract a deadly virus or not bring it back to my home weighed on me in a way that I realized I can't go at my normal pace. Like I can't pretend that everything is fine except just on Zoom. And so it forced me, and I'm grateful for this, to make some decisions about what was really important. It's forced me to get very intentional about my yeses and my nos so that the activities that I engage in are consistent with the way I want to show up in my life and in the world. it's also forced me to attend to my relationships, right? I've also had some losses over the course of this year due to COVID, due to lots of other things. And for me, I don't want to look back on any of this time and realize that I neglected a relationship that was really important to me. If I don't do anything else right in this world, I want to get being a mother right? And so my priorities are there, right? My work is important to me. It's a big part of the way I show up in the world, but I want to enjoy my life too. Right. And so this season has forced me to shift my priorities. And I appreciate that it's also, for me, a saying that I've been saying a lot over the past 18 months is grace abounds.
Yeah.
I want to grant myself grace, but I also want to grant other people grace because I know what's going on in my life. I don't even know what's going on in their life, but I at least know they're trying to manage a global pandemic, and it's hard.
That's enough.
That's enough.
That's enough.
Not to mention whatever else they have going on. So when in doubt, there's so many opportunities to extend grace, and I think it changes the way we can interact with each other, and it changes the way we can understand ourselves. So if there have been times for me when I haven't been able to do everything on my to-do list, cool. It is what it is. And when I've identified what's important, I know I've hit what really matters, and everything else I can get to when I get to it. So that, for me, has really been transformational because I'm not running from thing to thing, right? I've built in some space to give myself a chance to just reflect and to do what's important.
That's good, and I hope you all are catching all of these nuggets that she's dropping about just managing this season and all of the craziness that goes along with the pandemic and the various things that you may even have happening in your life. You mentioned, about the losses that you've experienced over the course of the last 18 months, and certainly for our nation, for our world, and individually in our families and our churches and communities, we've lost a number of, people. But also, not just that, we've, lost jobs and relationships and various things. How, particularly in terms of grief and coming, hopefully, on the other side of this pandemic, right, and managing the grief from, the continual realization of the reality of these losses. Like, what would you say to people that are, to all of us, really, because all of us in some shape or form are dealing with this grief? What advice would you give in regards to that?
I think the most important thing is to acknowledge that we are grieving. Yeah. There is, for me at least, no glory in pushing through. We, especially in the Black community, we have a history of having to just take it on the chin and go. And there was a time when that was necessary for our survival, right? But for me, one of the ways I resist that, like the history of racial injustice in this country, is not to treat myself as a machine. Wow. I'm not a machine. I'm a human being. So, recently my family had a very big loss that has kind of left us reeling. And for me, last week, being honest about that was saying I couldn't do it, right? So I really did the bare minimum. And I had to make space for that grief because if I ignored it, it's not as if it would go away. It would just show up in another way, right? And so I think it's very important for us to acknowledge and sit with our feelings, and especially as we're grieving, that means sometimes we just have to slow down a little bit and feel that experience and shed the tears and talk about what we're dealing with. And I just want to say, grief is not just about losing people, right? Grief can be about, here at 6 Mile Zion, I walked in church today and I was like, I haven't been in this sanctuary. And, there's grief associated with not having been able to see my church family the way I normally would. There's grief associated with the fact that my kids haven't been able to connect with family because we're trying to social distance and keep people safe, right? And so I think it's important to say, I am impacted by this. I'm not just walking through as if nothing is getting to me, right? And there is strength in acknowledging that we are not okay. For me, that's one of the most important pathways to healing and coming out on the other side, as you said earlier, is to say, look, there is another side. I know that it exists, but right now I'm on this side and it hurts. And that's okay.
It's that old song in the church, right? It's a bright side somewhere. But we got to, I won't rest until I find it,
Yes.
And it's that kind of notion that we have to carry with us as we think about, moving through the course of, the grief and giving ourselves, as you said, giving ourselves a space to just feel it, and recognizing it's not a linear thing at all.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. My father passed away, I guess, almost 15 years ago now. And there are still times where if his number was still programmed in my phone, I would probably be picking up the phone and call him, right? And so this idea that, okay, I'm going to grieve for 3 months and then I'll be done and I'll go on with my life is a disservice. We're human beings. And especially when it's something that we care about, we reserve the right to mourn the loss of that thing. And it shows how important it was to us. So sometimes we circle back to that, and that's okay. This season has also shown us that we have lots of opportunities with the ways we can show up, right? And one of my hopes is that we always have those opportunities, right? Because sometimes maybe I can't show up in person, but I can call in, and that's something. And that's what I can do for that day.
Right, that's major, and certainly condolences to your family.
Thank you.
In the loss of your loved one. I want to talk a bit about some of the anxiety that comes around the whole vaccination thing. So have you been vaccinated?
I have been vaccinated,
Cool.
and I was vaccinated early because I'm a healthcare worker.
Right.
So I totally get the hesitation, and I think especially as African Americans, we have a spotty history with the medical system that I understand and I respect. We also, as I said earlier, learned very early that we were really negatively impacted by this pandemic. Folk who look like us were dying at higher rates. And for me, the decision to get vaccinated was first about protecting my family. I have 2 young children who are too young to get vaccinated, and I'm not trying to bring something home to them, right? I have a mother and other family members who have health conditions that put them at great risk, right? And I also understand kind of the larger science about the fact that the more of us who get vaccinated, we're not just protecting ourselves, but we're also protecting people in our community, right? So for me, there was a selfish piece of, I don't want to get COVID, so I'm going to do it for me, but I'm also going to do it for all of the people I love, maybe some of whom can't get vaccinated, but if I do it, I lower their chances of contracting the virus. So it was a decision that I made. I posted on social media, like, hey, ask me about side effects. I'll be totally honest, right? Because I do think we have a right to ask questions. But for me, it was a positive experience. I didn't have a lot of side effects. The sense of relief that I felt that at least I had done my part in terms of protecting my community was really important. And frankly, if the opportunity comes around and they say folks who are healthy and young can get a booster, I'm doing that too, right? Because I think for me, any small step I can take that helps us to see the other side of this, I want to be a part of that. And we have excellent medical professionals who look like us, who have been a part of this process, who are giving us all the information and giving us all the facts about the vaccine. And so it's okay to have our hesitation, and I also think we have an opportunity to act in ways that protect all of us. So I'm really happy to be a part of that.
That's awesome, and I would definitely agree with all that you said in regards to that, in terms of being able to get vaccinated for the sake of family, but really for the sake of community as well.
Yeah.
It's like as Paul writes in Ephesians, he talks about looking out for the interests of others. That's not Ephesians, that's in Philippians chapter 2, but he talks about looking out for the interests of others. And that's part of our role in our faith journey. Is to be a part of doing that. And so you mentioned about community, and I know that you have a chapter. If y'all haven't gotten this book, Making Space at the Well, please go get it. We'll let Dr. Young Brown tell us where all of the places and spaces where you can order it in a little bit. But I know that you have a section in your book that talks about community and the importance of community. And can you talk a little bit about how community can help us even in the midst of the pandemic, and hopefully, again, coming on the other side of it, how it can help us and enhance our, our mental health and help us to kind of better deal with the circumstances that we're facing.
Sure. So when I was in graduate school, I took a health psychology course, and my colleagues and I used to joke that the whole field of health psychology can be broken down into stress hurts, social support helps.
Wow.
Right? And so we as human beings are oriented toward connection. And one of the great travesties of this pandemic is that for many of us, it disconnected us from our people. Yeah. And that was a part of the cost that I think we don't always recognize. Yeah. There was a physical cost, of course, but think about people who live alone and literally didn't see another human being for months on end while we were on lockdown, right? We as human beings need connection to be okay, and not just for our mental and emotional health, but for our physical health too. There are studies on young babies, and if young babies are not like touching people, they don't do as well physically. Wow. There's a reason that babies cling to primary caregivers. Mm-hmm. There's a reason that our first instinct when we feel hurt or scared is to reach out for a hug, right? We are biologically wired for connection. And so I think it's important that we seek out that connection, particularly with people who are our safe place, to really support the work that we're doing in our own lives. And, my hope is that, for me at least, another reason behind my vaccination was I want to see my people, right? I mean, these little Zoom family calls are cute, but I'm tired of playing games on Zoom. I need to lay my eyes on you and hug your neck, right? And so that's a big piece of the way we relate to each other, and it's a big piece of our health. So any way we can connect is important. Those virtual methods are great, and if we have the opportunity to connect personally in healthy ways, I think we should think about how we can seek that out as well. One of the things I saw very early in the pandemic in my practice is that people were really exhausted and drained by the isolation, and that seemed to make everything else worse, right? So we really had to get creative around, okay, you can't see your people, it's not safe, but how can you be intentional about connecting with them? Maybe a text message isn't enough. Maybe you actually need to pick up the phone and call. Or when it's warm, maybe you need to go for a walk in the park, right? And so I think those things are still good rules of thumb. And anytime we have a chance to connect, it's not just that it's fun, but it's also healing. And it's something that we need to thrive as human beings.
Now, that's good. I recently kind of experienced that myself in terms of being in community with, with other pastors who all are leading in the pandemic, even with their own personal things, and having dealt with isolation and feeling isolation in that regard myself. Having, been able to talk to them and just kind of not even really share a lot of what I was dealing with, but hearing their stories and being around them and laughing and knowing that I'm not by myself was so helpful. So being in community is vital to helping us to heal and even to recover as we, on the other side of COVID-19. Y'all pray.
On the other side.
On the other side. Absolutely. And any other kind of mental health, just kind of like tips that you would, like to offer? I will say one of the things that I love that you do every week on social media is on Monday you're asking the question, how are you showing up for yourself this week? And even if I don't answer on the status, like I'm always asking myself that question, like how can I show up for myself this week? And maybe that's one of the tips is like just finding ways to show up for yourself. But what are some other things that you would kind of suggest or offer? Particularly as we, as we've learned from the pandemic, that would help us to manage our mental health and to be more attentive to our needs for self-care.
Sure, certainly that's an accountability piece for me. That when I'm asking other people to identify how they're showing up for themselves, it reminds me, hey girl, attend to you, right? Which is something I really need. So that's helpful. And I have actually started kind of going back to old posts and checking in with people like, hey, a couple weeks ago, you said you were showing up around this thing. How's it going?
Oh, wow.
And for me, it's a way to remind all of us it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? And so any decisions that we make today or tomorrow are not just for us now, which is cool, but they're also for us in the future, right? And so I think about showing up as, how can I live a life today that tomorrow I'll be glad that I lived it this way? I think the other thing that's really important is we have to take care of our bodies. We often underestimate the way stress impacts the body, but if you've been having trouble sleeping, your appetite and your GI system is all over the place, your concentration is iffy, that could be one of the ways stress is manifesting in your life. And one of the things I tell my clients all the time is our bodies will tell on us before our minds catch up. So one of the best ways we can attend to our mental and emotional health is actually to care for our bodies. And it sounds really simple, but sleep, exercise, nutrition, right? Our body is a temple, right? We should take care of it. But our body is also the vessel through which we do what God is calling us to do, right? And so if I'm going to be who God has called me to be, I have to take care of the body God has given me. Because if I don't take care of this body, I can't commit to the call that I have on my life, right? And when I take care of my body, I'm better equipped to manage that stress at work, the family conflict, the high grocery prices and gas being $3.19 a gallon, right? I'm better able to do all of that if my body is well cared for. And so I think we really have to attend to our bodies. We talked about the connection piece. I think we should seek out connection wherever we can. And the final piece I'll say here, which I would be remiss to my whole profession if I didn't do this, find a therapist if you don't have one already. You know, I joke with people that my therapist has saved my life and the life of many others because, you know, she does the Lord's work in terms of keeping me in check, right? Therapy is one of the only places in our lives where we can spend a whole hour and you and that other person are just committing to you being the best version of yourself that you can be. Just committing to you being well. And I know that there are lots of challenges. It costs money. It can be challenging to find the time. And waiting through all of those challenges is worth it to really attend to yourself in that way. So if you haven't tried it, I encourage you to try it. If you haven't been in a while, I encourage you to go back. It's a great way to just identify some things that you want to work on, and it's a way of showing up for yourself. Yeah,
that's good. I'm going to co-sign that, too. Go get a therapist.
Get a therapist.
And
you can find a dope black therapist,
Absolutely.
too.
Right here in Richmond. There's plenty of them.
There's so many of us.
I'm sitting beside one, too. But certainly, Dr. Brown has a lot of connections to those that are here in the Richmond area, and I'm certainly throughout the country that are great therapists that will be welcome to take you on to have conversation with you and to help you to get to being your best self. Or like I saw somebody post on social media recently, being your favorite self.
Yes.
Being your favorite
That's my
self.
new motto.
Yeah. So I thought that was really good. As we kind of close our conversation today, I do want to give you opportunity to just talk a little bit about your book and your work around making space at the well. We mentioned it earlier, mental health in the church. Please make sure that you order it from...
Sure. So you can order it from Amazon, Making Space at the Well, Mental Health in the Church. If you want a signed copy, you can order it from my website, drjessicabrown.com. You can order it from the publisher's website, Judson Press. There's a Kindle version. The book is really about how we as the Black church can talk about mental health. Yeah. We talk about Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well, and really use that story as a model for what it means to be in relationship, right? The book is really about deep relationship and about how relationship is the healing factor in what we do in the church in particular. And so my hope for all of us is that the church becomes a place that we can show up however we're feeling and know that the love of Jesus covers it all, right? I can be messed up, I can be out of whack, I can be stressed out, and church should be a place that I can come and talk about all of that and get what I need. Right. So my hope is that for leaders, for all of us, everywhere in the church, we can read that book and just think about ways to connect with each other so that our relationships are a healing balm. Yeah. If anything, has kind of come up for us over the course of this pandemic is that we need each other.
Yeah,
and so my hope is that that's something that we can continue to reinforce as we move forward.
Wonderful, wonderful. So yes, go grab it from all of the various outlets she mentioned. Let's support her work, and particularly in this season as we're kind of on the other side. One of the things that I've been thinking about is how we as a church help our parishioners and our communities to heal.
Yeah.
On the other side of of COVID-19, and so that's going to be a long process. But certainly, your book is a phenomenal resource towards helping to make that happen. Well, thank you for sharing so much with us today, and for blessing us with this phenomenal conversation and all of your wisdom and insight and knowledge. We're so grateful for you. You are a gift to our city, you're a gift to the church, and we praise God for you.
Thank you, Pastor Gilliam. It's been good to see you.
Absolutely.
What a conversation that was. And we are so excited. Again, Reverend Gilliam has let you know about Dr. Brown's book, and we encourage you. Let me get that book, brother. We encourage you to go out and purchase this book. Amazon, and Dr. Brown told you the other ways that you can pick it up. So please go out and purchase the book, hoping that it will help you in this season. We're going to jump on real quickly afterward and have some conversation as we normally do. 804-203-9011. And so for those of you who are on dial pad, just stay on. If you're watching by way of Facebook, Twitter, then YouTube, then you need to jump off and go to dial pad, dialpad.com/SMZBC or 804-203-9011. And we'll be waiting. So if you have any more specific questions, we'll capture them at that particular time. Don't forget that we have prayer call tomorrow at 7 a.m. Thursday. We're feeding on Friday, 12:45 to 2 o'clock, and then join us for worship on Sunday at 10:45. And again, we thank our guest, Pastor Gilliam, and our friend and family member here at the Mount, Dr. Jessica Brown. We thank you